Girl 489 should have been easy to forget. Most all TF2 cheaters are. A username on a dead forum, a brag post nobody reads about, a cheat download that vanished years ago. But Girl 489 kept showing up. Not just in some old scene lore, but in public posts and later repositories that still trace part of their own code history back to Darkstorm. And that matters, because Darkstorm was not just remembered as a cheat people used for a while. Some TF2 cheat repositories still describe it as a base or a framework people could build on. And that's why this story starts with him. Not because he was the first cheater TF2 ever had, not because he was the loudest, but because he was tied to something more dangerous than a single cheat, a project that other people could learn from, extend, and carry forward long after its original moment had passed. So, that story is no longer just about one guy cheating in Team Fortress 2. It becomes a story about the point where cheating stopped being disposable and started becoming something other people could inherit. The strange thing about Girl 489 is that he did not stay hidden behind a name. In a 2014 Reddit AMA, he publicly identified himself as Robert Bloody, also known as Girl 489. He said he was 25, living in Michigan, working at IBM, and described a hacking background that stretched back to 1999 through games like Quake 2, Unreal Tournament, Counter-Strike 1.3, Half-Life Deathmatch before TF2. And that already makes him different from the average old TF2 cheater. Because in his own telling, he was never just a player using a tool. He described himself as someone who had been programming since he was 7 years old, starting on Packard Bell 486, running MS-DOS 5, first using a VB6 and moving to assembly and C. In the same AMA, he also talked about pen testing, reverse engineering, exploit development, fun breaking, and even about a brief work on GoldenEye source. All of that matters, because it changed what kind of person we are looking at. We are not looking at a random player who found the menu. We are not looking at somebody who just wanted some easy wins. But we are looking at someone who seems to have spent years looking at software as something that could be opened up, studied, forced apart, and rewritten. And the clearest line he ever gave about himself is also the shortest. When someone asked him why he hacked game at all, his answer was simple. It was a challenge. And to say that he did it. That one sentence explained almost everything. The point was not just to have the advantage. The point was to understand the system deeply enough to break it. And then being able to say that he was the one who did it. And that's what made Girl 489 very useful as a starting point. Because once we take that into considerations about him, Darkstorm stopped looking like random old TF2 cheat. It started looking like a product of a very specific mindset. One that cared about control, authorship, and building something that could last beyond a single match. Darkstorm started in that case, and why it mattered? Well, if Girl 489 is where the trail begins to make sense, Darkstorm is where it starts to matter. Because Darkstorm was not remembered as just another cheat people injected, used for a while and forgot. Even years later, there were some public repositories that were still talking about it as a base, a framework, something other people could plug into, modify and carry forward into their own projects. And that's a crucial distinction. A normal cheat is a dead end. You just buy the loader and that's it. It just gives one player an advantage, then disappear with the build, the account or the scene around it. A framework is different. It gives the next person a place to begin. It turns cheating into something you use into something you can build on. And according to Girl 489 on public account, Darkstorm did not begin with TF2 alone. In his 2014 AMA, he says that Darkstorm was a project named he and Ryan Williams, also known as Calvin, had been using for Valve-related hacking work since around 2004. Starting during the Half-Life 2 alpha era, then moving into Counter-Strike Source before eventually reaching TF2. In that same account, he said that the early TF2 version began as a direct 3D hack before later becoming engine-based once they had a reverse SDK to work with. What's interesting about it is Robert Bloody said that Darkstorm was his idea, his name and his base, while also saying that Calvin did most of the early work on the first mature version. So it kinda remind me. So I'm not gonna say that there was difference or a dispute in authorship about the project, but what's interesting about that is that it tells something very important. He did not want to be remembered as someone adjacent to Darkstorm. He wanted to be remembered as one of the people who built his foundation. And I think that's also what makes Darkstorm so important, that and the fact that it was a framework for cheating. It's because it just didn't just existed, or it wasn't it just worked, but later people also treated Darkstorm as an entry point into cheating and into developing cheating software. So if Darkstorm also explained why Girl 489 mattered, so next question we should ask is what kind of figure he actually was inside TF2? Because again, there is a difference between a cheater and someone well known, someone like a scene figure. A cheater wins a match, but a scene figure will just change the shape of the scene around him. And Girl 489 looked a lot closer to the second kind. In public, he did not describe himself like someone who had simply found a good menu and stuck with it. In his hammer, he described reaching the unofficial Reddit TF2 server and cheating on it for 2.5 hours before admins regained control, then doing it again later. That's not the behavior of someone trying to stay hidden. It is the behavior of someone who wants his presence felt. It also changed the way how you read the rest, because Robert Bloody wasn't just interested in winning, he seems interested in demonstrating control over the server, control over the game, and maybe most importantly, control over the story people will tell afterward. And that's exactly the tone it takes in his 2015 post. Then, he again identifies himself as Robert Bloody, called himself the curator of the Darkstorm project, and said he had accumulated more than 35 exploits against the source engine, many of which he had sent to Tony Paloma, also known as Drunken Fool, in the hopes that Valve would patch them. In the same post, he says that only 5 had been fixed, and he would name the examples like the heavy slow state exploit, the infinite overcharge, or the name stealing. That's also like the moment where like it become more interesting than just a normal villain in a cheating story. Because he was not just exploiting the game, he was also documenting, mapping, and in his own way curating its failure. Obviously it was not for a noble reason, not because he wanted to save TF2, but because understanding those failures was part of the power and was part of the process. And that is why it feels larger than the average cheater from that era. He was not just using broken systems, he was building an identity around knowing them better than the people maintaining them. To conclude, was Girl 489 the first cheater in TF2? Probably not. And more importantly, that's not a question that actually matters. But the more useful question is this: at what point did cheating in TF2 stop being just a player problem and started becoming something closer to an ecosystem? At what point did it stop being one person with one tool and start becoming something other people could learn from, extend, and inherit? That's where Rebel Bloody become historically important. Not because every part of his self-told story can be treated as gospel, but because it is not really important about whether one man cheated in a 15 or 17 years old shooter, because a lot of people did that. It is about what happens when somebody had moving cheating from an act into a structure, from something temporary into something reusable, from one ugly moment in one server into a framework that other people and other cheat software can keep building on years later. And once a game reached that point, the problem changed. It is no longer just about catching the people who are cheating right now. It becomes about the fact that the scene has learned how to preserve its own tools, pass them on, and rebuild itself faster than the game can forget them. Darkstorm mattered because it was part of that transition, and Mobile Bloody matters because whether as author, curator, public face, or all three at once, it stands unusually close to the moment that transitions became visible. Anyway, it was Malatos. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and let me know, did you guys knew about Darkstorm before that? And also I would love if you guys could subscribe. We are so close from reaching 1000 subscribers, and I would love to hit it soon.